Vision's Global Talk Show for Saturday, February 20th. I'm Betsey Lewis, and today we have a real treat in store for you with my guest author and explorer, Andrew Collins from the UK. The chat room is open, but we won't be able to take your calls because of the time, but please post your questions in the chat room, and I'll be looking for them. During the last 15 minutes of the show, Master Astrologer Bill Hedrick will join us and tell us all about his extraordinary experience inside the Great Pyramid. So let me tell you about Andrew Collins. He's a modern-day Indiana Jones, and he has discovered a vast tunnel system underneath the Giza Plateau, which he wrote about in his new book, Beneath the Pyramids. He's also a popular writer of history, archaeology, and science. For over 30 years, he has investigated archaic religious beliefs and the cosmos, examining the origins of human civilization and development of technology and the inspirations behind magic and religion. His discoveries have led to several thought-provoking books which challenge our history. Andrew is also the organizer of Questing Conference, Britain's premier event on alternative history, forbidden archaeology, and ancient wisdom. His books include The Cygnus Mystery, The New Circle Makers, From Ashes of Angels, Gateway to Atlantis, Alien Energy, Gods of Eden, 21st Century Grail, and Tutankhamun, The Exodus Conspiracy. His website is andrewcollins.com. That's Collins, Collins.com. And before we get started, excuse me, I'm having some problems with my voice. Before we get started, I'd like to preface this interview a little bit about Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet. He lived from 1877 to 1945, and during his lifetime, he gave over 14,000 readings in a trance-like state, ranging from past lives, predictions, Atlantis, ancient Egypt, to alternative medicine, where these readings are cataloged at the ARE in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Cayce talked about the Hall of Records Temple, which we would call a time capsule, on Atlantis. These records contain information about humanity's true history from the beginning to the present, which lies beneath somewhere in the Giza Plateau, and Andrew Collins may have found that entrance. So welcome, Andrew. How are you?
Hi. Yeah, I'm fine, Betsy. Thank you very much for inviting me on to speak tonight.
Well, you know, I'm just so anxious to hear about what you found. It sounds so incredible, but tell us how you first got involved with this, with the Cayce readings, and how you discovered this entrance.
Well, my own interest really begins in 1985, and I was working on a British mystery at the time, and a friend of mine who I knew had psychic talents mentioned to me one day that he'd had a very strange dream the night before where he had travelled to Egypt and he'd seen the Sphinx monument beneath him, and he'd found himself going underground at this point and entering a strange chamber which he described as having green stone walls with inscriptions on, and he felt that this was one chamber of a large number that existed in the vicinity of the Sphinx, and that they dated to some kind of civilization or high culture that existed even before the Pyramid Age. Now, this was relatively news to me at this time. I think I probably did know about Edgar Cayce. So I started to investigate the idea of whether there might be hidden chambers at Giza. And over the years, I looked at this from an Egyptological point of view, looking at the creation myths and legends. And I found that the Egyptians really had talked about some kind of cave underworld existing at Giza, and that the entrance was referred to as Rostau, which was the ancient name of Giza and actually means the mouth of the passages, which is a clear indication of caves. So for many years I looked for the entrance to this possible cave underworld, which was mentioned in ancient Egyptian myths of creation, myths of the underworld myths of the afterlife. Because remember, the ancient Egyptians believed that the soul of the deceased person had to first travel through caves to reach a point on the horizon where it could then exit these caves and rise up into the sky and become at one with the stars of the heavens and achieve a kind of afterlife there. Anyway, cut long story short, after various false starts and some possible entrances that I came across, I started to take an interest in the northwestern corner of the Giza Plateau. This is several hundred yards due west of the Great Pyramid, an area that is very little known and very little frequented, not just by tourists but also by Egyptologists. Hardly anything is known about this area. And I started to focus in on one particular tomb that seemed to have been used during the late dynastic times, that's just before the Roman period, for the burial of the mummies of birds. Now, this was a very obscure account from the first half of the 19th century, and this got me quite curious because it felt as if there was some kind of cult connected with this tomb associated with bird mummies. And since one of the main guardians of the underworld of Rostau or Giza was a bird, a hawk or falcon-headed god known as Sokar, I wondered whether there might be a relationship. So I actually visited the tomb in January 2007, and I scoured it. I couldn't find any entrances to anything. So I came away from there, but various other clues in the coming months indicated that this site was important. It seemed to fit quite nicely into some landscape geometry, which I was working on with an engineer friend of mine, which seemed to suggest that there was a significance with this site that we were somehow missing. But then a few months later, an Egyptological researcher, a friend of mine by the name of Nigel Skinner-Simpson, found the missing piece of the jigsaw. He came across the memoirs, the unpublished memoirs, or certainly unpublished up to this point, memoirs of a British diplomat and explorer by the name of Henry Salt. And in a few lines from his memoirs dating to 1817, it mentioned how he and an Italian explorer by the name of Giovanni Caviglia had entered into catacombs somewhere to the west of the Great Pyramid and travelled for a distance of several hundred yards before coming upon a large, spacious chamber that connected with two others of equal size. And unable to find any gold or treasure, Henry Salt came back at this point, leaving the Italian to investigate these catacombs further, which he did for 300 feet further. Notice the word further here. This was in the account, indicating that, they are at a great depth here, in the rock. Now, along with my colleague, we worked out exactly where this entrance was and realised it corresponded perfectly with the tomb that I'd already investigated, one that we like to refer to as the Tomb of the Birds, because of the bird mummies that are actually discovered there at the beginning of the 19th century. And so we went back there in March 2008, and this time I investigated the tomb in even more greater detail. And at first we found nothing, but then we were just about to leave to investigate some other smaller tombs in the area. Maybe that we'd got this wrong, and I found a small breach in a wall which we previously overlooked. And when I peered through this, I found that it was a ledge leading into a huge natural cave chamber, probably around 45 feet square, that was absolutely littered with fallen rock debris that had come down from the ceiling. But realising that I now couldn't go without exploring this, I clambered down in the absolute darkness, with only a small torch, into this very dangerous area, which was full of bats, and as we were to find out later, poisonous spiders, and a whole ecosystem that exists down here, and found that it led into a series of chambers and passageways that penetrate deep into the bedrock beneath the plateau, and almost certainly are the so-called catacombs that Salt and Caviglia explored in 1817. Now, we were able to reach probably a distance of around 100 yards into the rock, going towards the south before having to give up, because the air becomes so difficult, not just because of the bat droppings which are in the air as powder, what is known as guano, but also that the air is so devoid of oxygen that if you do not have the correct oxygen masks and equipment, then you would very quickly suffer the effects of the lack of oxygen, which would probably cause you to pass out. And this is a very dangerous situation that can actually lead to death. But having said this, we were able to visit the caves on 4 different occasions, and each time penetrate slightly further, and trying to investigate them, trying to record them, trying to draw a plan, taking as many photographs as we could, getting film footage, and just trying to understand exactly what was going on here. So that's the basis of the story. But of course, obviously, there are many questions that arise from this, and I'm sure they're already mounting inside, you now, and we can hopefully talk about them as we go along.
Now, what is the geology of the plateau? Is that mostly limestone? Are these natural caverns, or could they have been hollowed out by Egyptian workers, or what do you believe?
Well, the main geology of the plateau is oolitic limestone. That's limestone that is formed by very obvious plant life or shell life that existed obviously many millions of years ago. This said, when you get down to a depth of 15 to 20 meters, obviously sort of 45, 50, 55, 60 feet, the strata seems to change slightly from that's more obviously apparent on exposed areas of the plateau, which is just the oolitic limestone, because you find that the rock is actually very red and seems to almost be blackened in parts. Now, this is probably because of its exposure to the air across tens, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. The redness is some kind of iron compound, which almost certainly is what is known more commonly as red ochre. Red ochre is a very sacred rock that was powdered and used and still is today in various tribal and indigenous environments throughout Africa, as it is in various other parts of the world. And it's almost seen as like a lifeblood that relates to death and obviously to life and rebirth. And you find this on the walls down there. But the straight answer to the question is that the caves are natural. They were formed by the actions of water, as I said, tens if not hundreds of thousands of years ago. This is quite obvious. And
Andrew,
obviously they are
losing
linked.
You here. I don't know if the other listeners are having problems hearing you, but I'm sorry.
It's probably just my enthusiasm. The actual speaker of the phone is slipping further and further away from my mouth. You should be able to hear me okay now. Is that right? Or is the satellite link between here and the States fading?
Andrew, can you hear me?
I can hear you very well.
I'm getting a really bad connection here.
Okay. What would you like to do?
Oh, there you are. Okay, you're back again. Okay.
Oh, I'm back again. All right.
For a minute.
Fair enough. All right. Well, I apologise to any listeners here, but if it gets bad, obviously I can ring you back, but hopefully that won't be necessary.
Okay. No, you're fine now. You're fine. You're coming in clear.
Okay, excellent. Or maybe it was a passing cloud or something like that, getting between us and the satellite.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
This is so interesting. So do you think that the whole plateau is like riddled with caverns and maybe
I do, yes. I think that there was some very serious ground penetration radar research done in 2005, 2006 by a all-Egyptian team that discovered a large number of previously unknown cavities, chambers on the east side of the plateau. That's well away from the caves that we discovered. And these seem to be part of a tunnel network that has been suspected of existing there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. They're mentioned in folklore and legends and all sorts of things. But what's important is that in 2007 there was some quite crucial radar satellite imagery done of the Giza Plateau by a German satellite company, and they seem to have captured the route of the caves that we've explored so far. You can see them as like shadow lines coming from the cliff right towards the south in the very area that we explored them. So they seem to show the position of the caves. But what seems so important is that these shadow lines continue on and go all the way to beneath the second pyramid. Now, this is not the Great Pyramid, but it's its neighbour, the second pyramid, which was constructed for the pharaoh Khafre, also known as Khephren in Greek, around 4,500 years ago. And what's interesting here is that this, in Arab and in the tradition of the Sabians, the peoples of southeast Turkey, who had come to Giza on pilgrimages to venerate their gods, they believed that the second pyramid marked the whereabouts of the so-called tomb of Hermes. Now, Hermes was the name that the Greeks gave to the Egyptian god Thoth, or Thoth. Now, he was the god of judgment, of writing, and the moon, but he was also a god associated with the rites of passage of the dead through the underworld, on their way to the afterlife, and this was the same role that Hermes had in Greek. He was the guardian of the souls of the dead. So this name is something which I would expect to find in association with caves at Giza, and I suspect it very strongly that Henry Salt and Giovanni Caviglia were eventually able to travel these caves and reach the area beneath the second pyramid. I think that's probably how far they got. This was the several hundred yards that's mentioned in Salt's memoirs, and it could well be that the chambers that they entered were the tomb of Hermes, or certainly in the vicinity of them. I'm not saying that this is, the end of the caves. I think they probably extend even further from there, but it could well be that just somewhere in this vicinity is this fabled tomb of Hermes, And the importance about the tomb of Hermes is that it is said that Hermes was buried, and in his arms was this fabulous item known as the Emerald Tablet. Now, the Emerald Tablet was this sort of stela of green stone on which were written in strange hieroglyphs the secrets of creation, and that this was placed, with him when he died, and it's somewhere there beneath the plateau. Now, whether this Emerald Tablet exists in this form, I don't know. It has been suggested that maybe this is some kind of metaphor for a whole green stone wall within some kind of hidden chamber at Giza, which, as I say, is spoken about in various ancient texts, and that I know certain Egyptologists that believe that this exists at Giza, and they believe that on this wall are contained the originals of the so-called pyramid texts. These are the different religious spells and sayings and whatever that were necessary for the pharaoh, and much later, the common people and the priests and whatever, the dignitaries and scribes, would have to be aware of as they made their passage through the underworld into the afterlife. These were first inscribed on the walls of pyramids from a slightly later date from those found at Giza, probably dating to around 2300 BC. But the originals of those might just be contained on the walls of this secret chamber, which goes by a number of different names at Giza.
Right.
So, this is one of the prospects of investigating down there. And I'm sure that we will get on to the fact that since knowledge of our discoveries hit the internet, Egypt's most highest profile Egyptologist, Dr. Zahi Hawass, has on the one hand come out publicly to deny the existence of the caves, saying that we have not discovered any caves, we just simply got confused inside a cave, inside a tomb.
Oh, no.
But on the other hand, he then immediately sent a team of experts in various different fields to begin investigation of the Tomb of the Birds. And already he has uncovered vast subterranean galleries and chambers and other structures, and he hasn't even reached the caves yet. We know this because since we have been there, at least 3 parties have been into the tomb and managed to snap away and get a number of incredible pictures of what is being uncovered down there. I mean, if people are interested in this subject, go on to andrewcollins.com. There are updates there every few weeks of exactly what's being discovered. There's good photographs, everything of what's going on. You can follow this story there. Plus, also, obviously, my book, Beneath the Pyramids, describes the whole rediscovery of the cave underworld at Giza, and this is available now from Amazon, from my own site, and obviously, various other places as well. So, if you want to take this subject further, it's of interest to you, that there are ways of doing this.
Absolutely. I wonder why Zahi is so afraid of anybody finding anything. He seems so closed. He's such a charismatic personality, kind of a Hollywood type of guy, but when it comes to exploring things or finding things, it's like he's afraid that we'll discover that maybe Atlantis did exist or something like that. What do you think's going on there with Zahi?
Well, it's a certain amount of national pride. I don't think they've forever forgiven the outside world for discovering Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, because the idea that foreigners can come into your country and make the greatest discoveries ever is something that must be hated, by the native Egyptian peoples. And quite clearly there are dozens, if not hundreds, of different teams working at different sites in Egypt, and almost all of them are foreign. There's Americans, there's Polish, there's Japanese, there's Chinese, there's British, various Europeans, Germans, French, etc., etc. And these are all working on different sites, and they could all come up with great discoveries. But Dr. Hawass seems intent on making sure that any big discoveries that take place in Egypt are only made by Egyptians from now on. In other words, even if they are made by foreigners like myself, then I'm afraid that those discoveries are going to be snatched away from them and, placed firmly in his domain. And he has got to be the one that is seen on television, opening the tomb and revealing, these great discoveries. And it's a thing of national pride and something that he wants to be at the forefront of. I mean, in all honesty, there has never been such a charismatic leader of the Egyptian Antiquities Organization. Never before has somebody risen to this type of fame. I mean, he is the second most famous person in Egypt, maybe arguably even the first. And I would be classing him after the president Mubarak himself. I mean, until recently, he was the third most important or well-known Egyptian after Omar Sharif, the actor. But as Hawass himself says in his own lecture, Omar Sharif came up to him one day and said, "Now you are more famous than me." So, this is it. And, he stands shoulder to shoulder with, all of the top actors in the world, film directors, the top pop stars, people like Beyonce and Shakira, and all these sort of people. They go to Egypt, they go to the pyramids, and Dr. Hawass is there to take them round. So he is always at the forefront of anything that happens in the name of Egyptology. Right. So, I expected this to happen. What I did not expect to take place is for him to deny the existence of the caves, because this makes him look quite foolish, because we have published, at least a dozen, maybe more, photos of the caves. Plus, there are many more in my book, Beneath the Pyramids.
Andrew, when you went there, the last time you were there was in 2008, right, with your wife?
That's correct,
and
yeah.
Was it Nigel?
Yeah.
The three of you went there. And I was just wondering, did you have permission with Zahi Hawass, or did you just go in there at night and explore?
No, we went in there during the day.
Did you?
I mean, the Giza Plateau is somewhere that a tourist, i.e. a visitor, can get onto and explore to their heart content. However, the Egyptian authorities like you to be in certain areas only, and those areas are on the main paths, generally between the pyramids and the Sphinx. They do not like you wandering off into areas on your own. At the end of the day, if you have a good reason to be there, they can't really stop you, or they won't really bother to stop you. And it is just a case of having the right answer if anybody does stop you. And by luck, more than anything else, we were able to get to the areas that we wanted to investigate. I mean, from our point of view, I would never have been able to get official permission to have investigated this tomb, ever. My background is as a journalist, as a writer, and as an explorer. I would not have got the permission. It's as simple as that. I'm not an academic. So we have to do this by other means. We have done nothing illegal. We have simply, been lucky to have been able to get to the places to explore them in the way that we have done. And that's that, really. But having said that, I work with people who work in a scholarly capacity and have been closely associated with the work that we do. But as I said, if I'd have applied to the Antiquities organisation and said, could I explore this tomb, there's no way that I would have got permission ever.
I'm sure. Well, they don't stop people from exploring. I'm sure they have certain areas, like you said, they want you to stay away from. But, I wanted to ask you about Cayce because he said, I know, and I was looking this up again, he said that we won't be able to enter the Hall of Records until consciousness of humanity reaches a certain point, describing another step in our collective evolution beyond war, hate, and greed. He also said those who were left as guards cannot be passed until this state of awareness is achieved. And it almost sounds like a trap, like in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned something about, did you mention something about some kind of guard or something that guards a great crystal there?
That's correct.
And I wanted to ask you about that.
There's two parts to this question that need answering. One to do with Cayce and one to do with the serpent guardian of the cave. So let's talk about Cayce to start with.
Yeah.
Edgar Cayce talked about the existence of what he called the Hall of Records, some kind of chamber existing in the vicinity of the Sphinx at Giza. Now, he saw this in terms of a physical chamber containing tablets on which were written the life experiences of individuals that thrived at the time of a civilization that he believed existed at Giza around 10,500 years ago. 10,500 BC. Now, he saw it as very matter-of-factly, but if you look very closely at his works, what he was saying is that this was a physical representation of the astral Hall of Records that he would regularly go and enter whilst he was in a trance-like state in order to be given the life experiences of the people that actually came to him for sittings, for life readings, and whilst he was in an astral state, a trance state, this information would be given to him. He would be verbally giving this information to the sitters at the time. The two would be completely unlinked. He'd have like these visions, these dreams, if you like. At the same time, his voice, his vocal cords would be giving this information, like, you lived in ancient Egypt, 12,500 years ago, your name was, this, you did this, you were involved with the Sphinx or the building of the pyramids, which he believed dated to this epoch. Now, this is interesting because, he saw that Egypt was the place of like a physical representation of this astral Hall of Records, this astral book of life, if you like. And that's what he was trying to describe. I think that in many ways this is too much materialistic way of looking at what might exist down there, because that brings us on to the guardian aspect of the caves, because I've discovered that the caves amongst local folklore, are said to be guarded by this great serpent called El Hanash, who's said to guard this crystal, this great diamond, and it is said that this exists within this cave underworld, and that anybody that tries to approach this crystal will be blinded by the snake.
Wow.
However, the prophecy goes that one day somebody will come along and the snake El Hanash will blind them only in one eye, and they will then be able to step forward, pass through a series of gates, and come before this great crystal, this diamond, and they will then gain these like godly powers and learn the wisdom of the ancients. Now, clearly there's a lot of fantasy involved here, and some of it may even be influenced by modern ideas as well, to some degree. But I think that at the core of this is something very, very important, because the ancient Egyptian texts talk about this secret chamber at Giza as containing some kind of power object, which is described as the seed or the embryo. And I believe that it is very similar to a concept that's present in the Near East, the Middle East, and even in India, of some kind of stone or crystal representing the point of first creation in the physical world or the universe as a whole. I mean, for instance, in Greece, these stones were known as omphiloses or omphili. There was a number of them. There was a prominent one at Delphi, for instance. In the Near East, they were known as betel stones, betels, the house of God, the place of God. And in India, they are known as lingams, linga stones. And all of them represented the same thing. They were like representations of the God of creation, or the point of creation. And I believe that this is exactly what is contained within this hidden chamber beneath Giza. This is what Edgar Cayce was trying to describe with his Hall of Records. This is what is behind the story of the prophecy of El Hanash, and it's also what is behind the stories of this secret chamber at Giza, becoming like the place of rebirth of the gods, something that they tried to replicate in the different tombs and coffins and sarcophagi within the pyramids and elsewhere. This is what they're trying to recreate. This is what originally existed down there. This, I believe, is what we will eventually find if we explore those clay caves properly. This is the original emerald tablet.
So do you think maybe the crystal could also be what Edgar Cayce was talking about with the great and mighty crystal, which was one of the power sources for Atlantis? Could that have been?
I do. Yes, I do. I do think that is the case. I think that he probably referred to it as the Firestone, if I remember rightly.
Yes. Yes.
However, there are certain gaps in our knowledge here. The crystal that Cayce was talking about was associated with either Atlantis or with the outcrop of Atlantis in the Yucatan. I have not found any of his readings that speak specifically of the crystal at Giza. If anybody has information relating to this, then I'll happily hear from them. But having said that, I do think that's probably what he was talking about. Yeah, yes, I do.
Right. I know we've got about 5, maybe 10 minutes left, because you're going to have to leave the program because of the time that you have on there. So, are you going to have to leave in about 5 minutes, Andrew?
I will, unfortunately. Yeah, a little bit longer than that. A little bit longer than that. Probably about 8 to 10, I'd say maximum. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Now, I wanted to, do you think that maybe you found the entrance to the Hall of Records? Because I think you have. I think.
Well, I mean, I can't answer that question directly, but let me answer it in this way. There were 3 of us that discovered those caves. Myself, Nigel Skinner-Simpson, who's a very respected Egyptological researcher, and my wife, Sue Collins. And back in 1998, 1999, Nigel Skinner-Simpson came in contact with a psychic, and this psychic said to him, out of the blue, that you will be one of 3 people that discover the entrance to the Hall of Records. And at the time, he noted this down and didn't take any real note of what was said. And I've said to Nigel, I said, well, look, Nigel, I said, in your lifetime, I think it's unlikely that you'll ever come closer to fulfilling that prophecy. And to me, that's quite a wonderful thing that this person should have said this, all the way back then. I mean, remember, Edgar Cayce said that 1998 would be a very important year for the discovery of the Hall of Records. He said that ultimately either they would be found that year or the quest would really begin. And this was a definite year of discovery. From my point of view, it was, a major stepping stone in my own quest as well. A lot happened that year for a lot of people. I think that, Cayce was on the ball, and I do think that psychics have a very, very important role to play here, that they can almost predict what is going to happen as far as the discovery of it, because there is so much focus on Egypt, so much focus on the pyramids and on the Sphinx.
Right.
And I openly invite psychics to contact me and tell me what they believe will be discovered beneath the plateau. I'm happy to hear from people. If anybody wants to write to me,
great.
Via my website, andrewcollins.com,
sure.
I'm happy to hear from them, because they might just have the key to allowing us to understand better of what's going on down there, or, maybe another entrance, or where we should go, or whether to turn left or right when we get to a certain point. Do you know what I mean? It's
sure.
There is no other way. The Egyptologists are not going to be able to help us in this front. I mean, clearly, if Zawi Hawass and his team do go into the caves, then, they will discover something incredible. And I'm sure that they've already discovered lots of artifacts and knowledge and information in the areas of the tomb that they've explored so far, and in the underground chambers that they found. But
right.
so far, they haven't explored the caves, we don't think. So, anything could happen, anything could be found.
Right. Well, they've already found some very strange things in Egypt that they call them upars, out-of-place artifacts, and I know there's some wall reliefs, like in Abydos, that show what looks like a modern-day helicopter, military
I know it very well,
and things like that. So, there's something to that. But I wanted to ask you: do you have a sense that you had an incarnation in Egypt? Because it sounds like you
do.
did.
Yeah, I mean, between you and me and your listeners, obviously, it doesn't go any further than that. I mean, I would think so. I mean, back in 1985, when I first got into this, the psychic that I was working with, somebody who's well known to some of my earlier books, a friend of mine by the name of Bernard, he started talking about this underground complex, which we refer to, by the way, as the Crystal Chambers. And he specifically picked up information that suggested that, both he and I were present for the actual sealing of these chambers sometime around 11,000, BC, just in advance of some kind of catastrophe in the natural world, something which we now think was probably caused by a comet impact, which has been dated at around 10,900 BC, something that had a huge impact around the world, and that it brought to the end an epoch that was remembered within the myths and legends of the people that were descendants that came after this time, and that made their way into the different ancient Egyptian myths and legends and whatever. They talk about this age, they talk about this time of catastrophe, they talk about it being the time of the gods. They call it Zep Tepe, the first time, or the first occasion. And I believe that it happened. I believe that, there was a catastrophe, there was something going on at Giza at this time. Whether it's exactly as my friend Bernard stated, I don't know. Whether it's exactly as Edgar Cayce stated, I don't know. Whether it's exactly as per the ancient Egyptian texts, I don't know. But it's a very, very exciting thing that's going on, and we've made more ground in the past 3 years than people have made in the last 70, and I think that needs to be, accepted and understood.
Andrew, have you scheduled a date to go back to Egypt, or is that still in the works?
No. But watch this space. I'll let people know. Anyway.
Oh, that would be great.
Well, I'll come back and tell you more in the future.
Oh, that would be awesome. I was going to say, could I go in your suitcase? I would love to go. I just have always had a fascination with Egypt, but
indeed,
maybe one of these days. And our time is up, Andrew, and I want to thank you so very much for coming on the show today.
It's my pleasure.
I'd love to get you back again and talk about some of the other fascinating books you've written.
Okay.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Brilliant.
And you have a great weekend.
Yep. And you. All the best then.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Okay, you too. Blessings. Bye-bye. Hi, everybody. I'm going to get Bill on the line, Bill Hedrick. He had an incredible experience at the Great Pyramids. I wish we could have spent more time with Andrew, but he only had he's got a busy schedule, and I know you had a lot of questions for him. I did too, but we just didn't have the time. But we'll get him back, I promise. And Bill, I know you're on the line. Hello. Thanks for coming on today.
Good afternoon, Betsey.
Hi. Well, tell us your incredible experience at inside the Great Pyramid at Giza.
Well, I'll have to talk to Andrew sometime. That was a good show.
Wasn't it? Yeah, he's incredible.
It was in the mid-'90s, I believe 96, that I was in Egypt with 3 other people, and they were interested in doing some exploration in terms of research and meditation with the pyramid. So they had booked out some time, some secure time where we could access some of the parts of the pyramids that are normally more public, so more quiet time.
Right.
And because of that, we were more focused on what we were doing as we went into the pyramid, went up the steps there to the chamber. And as we were going up the steps, there were initially 5 red orbs appeared out of nowhere.
Wow.
Really basketball size or larger, almost beach ball size. They seem to have some intelligence to them in terms of the way they were responding to this. We stopped as we were going up the stairs because they seemed to be. It seemed to be to us that they were guards of some type of energetic guard force, and we were because not just the color red symbolizing danger, but that they felt like they were guarding something, and they formed a row in front of us, as strange as that seemed, and we were just amazed what they were doing. So we had to stop, and then we saw about halfway up to the King's Chamber, we saw 2 green orbs that were not as threatening, that were higher up on the face walls, the side walls, leading up to the chamber. So we simply asked for permission to enter through these red wall. It was almost like a security fence, if you can kind of like a laser. But we knew that they had some level of intelligence, and they were listening to us. So when we asked for permission, they separated. They went up on the sides of the walls, and we were able to go up the stairway, that great stairway, into the toward the king's chamber, and then we had a very large blue orb that appeared right in front of the king's chamber doorway, and the red balls were still on the sides of the wall right by us, still following us up, right within a few feet of our heads, and it was just like out of a movie. And then when we looked up and we saw this blue ball up in front of the king's chamber, we asked for permission to go in, because it seemed to be a welcoming type of presence, and as hard as it is to conceptualize, that round blue ball orb formed into the shape of a person. No facial features, and we weren't able to make out a face with it, but it was clearly a very tall being, tall, and there was some interaction between these guard beings and that blue being, the red guard beings and a blue being, and they just went back down the walkway, the red beings did, and allowed us to enter. And subsequently, as we got right up to the entryway to the king's chamber, that blue being disappeared. So we went in, and the red guard beings followed us then came right up to the doorway, that's still an arched doorway, and stayed right outside, kind of like guard dogs. You know how a guard dog will, once people enter the owner's house, they'll stay outside right around the door. And right. So we did our meditation, which took a while. When we were done, we left and they were gone. But it was a consensus reality that we were all, for the most part, observing the same type of thing. It's a lot of so we haven't really had much of an opportunity to talk about that one before, but that does fit in with the connection with these sites being very special places, and they're alive, even though they look old and presumably dead for thousands of years. They're actually alive. And
very much, and there's some kind of presence. It sounds like there's beings there that are watching over it and protecting it, obviously. And you had a very special experience with the people you were with. Obviously, that you were allowed to go in there, and they wanted you to be there. So I think you and Andrew should hook up and go to Egypt and look for the Hall of Records. I'm sure. I think you should. There's obviously something going on there. Yeah, you'll have to get a hold of him.
The pyramids that are in the Yucatan and that are in South America correspond to those the grid lines that are on the Egyptian pyramids. And I had so after that we had some experiences that were very, very similar, not exactly, but seeing orbs and seeing a being at the Mayan pyramids. That was closer to. That was closer to a solstice. When we get to solstice equinoxes and new and full moons, we're dealing, and we're on those sacred sites. We're in eclipses. We're actually, there's more energy available in the grid system that comes out at those points that we can work with. And again, it looks very dead, but it is 1 octave higher than our normal vision range, which may be some of the perception they're talking about in Egypt with the eyes being able to see it, having one eye open, which can be the third eye, being able to actually see something and have it physically appear. Some of the security systems today, they're holographic. You walk in and you actually will have a holographic monitor appear or a holographic object appear that you have to that has to identify you either with an eye scan or a digital scan or a voice command, voice recognition, or fingerprint, or the harmonics of your voice. So you can actually speak to these grid points and cause things to happen. They don't always happen because the timing has to be right and the harmonics have to be right. But when people gather around and they're doing ceremonies around these ancient sacred sites and they're chanting or meditating, and it doesn't happen all the time, but when they're consciously aware of it, many times they do have occurrences of being able to see things. People that they don't know where they came from. How did they just appeared out of almost nowhere. I've just talked to person after person who had that kind of experience right on pyramids, and so they're fascinating subjects.
Oh, it is. So, Bill, how do you feel, since you're our master astrologer? How do you feel about what Cayce said and about there being a special time where the holo records will be revealed when our evolution has become higher and we're ready for that? Do you think we're ready for the holo records and what's in the Akashic records that are supposed to be in there, which tell about all souls and about Atlantis? How do you feel about that?
Well, I think from 96 to 98, 99, there was a very small percentage of people on the planet who would have been able to access that or be ready for that or actually see that or be aware of it. Very, very small. Now, going into this tipping point that I've been talking about this summer of 2010, and the mid-year 2011, out through the first part of 2012, that window, that we go through. The best way I can describe it is a mass consciousness download of awareness that wakes up. It doesn't mean that all the problems are fixed, but a lot of these things that have seemed very far out are going to download into consciousness. They're going to cause a lot of issues with people who have trouble adapting their thinking to new forms and new thoughts. But those kind of middle part of the population that are starting to with new forms of media that are starting to wake up. I think the media facilitates that consciousness going out and downloading even faster. So without that, I think there would even be I think that we would have an even harder time of it over the next couple of years, whether it's more earth changes or more problems with individuals, with groups, but the media helps this energy go out to all these various grid points and go in through consciousness, through people. They're like tuning forks through their bodies into the ground, and it helps that energy work with it. So yes, in my opinion, that's going to be. It hasn't been available yet to enough percentage of population to make a physical difference that is observable to most of the population. But I think by the time that we get to the third quarter of this year, fourth quarter of this year, and then 2011, we're in different territory. So things are going to open up. There'll be more earth changes. In terms of ocean points opening up, things becoming available, and then also land points opening up that correspond to a lot of those ocean points, because of course Egypt is one place in the world that has great pyramids, and there are others, and there are records in the other locations also. So the intelligence that designed them put those records there, and there's and a lot of they're in North America. In North America, a lot of them are with are in the physical topography of which seems seem to be natural mountains and kind of old ruins that are combined with natural formations, mountain formations, and those sort of things. And those that go back beyond this last cycle in Egypt, older, but they've been forgotten about. But they're still operative. So a lot of the Aboriginal and native tribal protection serves to hold that in place until it's ready. So long answer to your question, yes, I think it's going to definitely turn on in a way that it's going to be noticeable.
Edgar Cayce said that when Atlantis was going down, there was several upheavals, and many of the people from that continent started moving into other locations around the world, and they went to Egypt, and they went to Central America. That was another place where they put records, somewhere in the Yucatan, maybe Belize. Bimini is another place, which there's records, but there's just so many temples and things that haven't been uncovered yet in the jungles that may be unearthed one of these days. But I've been in Belize a couple of times, and I'll tell you, it reminds me, the mountains and everything, they're limestone, and I've heard of caverns and things like that, and there may be just incredible things that we just haven't found, like Indiana Jones. There's just all kinds of treasures and records out there that still haven't been found, and one of these days, I'm sure they'll be unearthed.
No question. Central America, South America, and then it's less. The North American presence is less known. It's less written about, but it's just as valid. This summer is going to be really going to be an interesting time, because it's a time, June, July, August, when the mass consciousness is waking up a whole octave, a whole level, and they have to resolve some anger issues as they're doing that, some old issues that may come out at that time, but hopefully we'll be able to control those in a way that they won't that people, person to person, country to country, that we'll be able to get through that period and allow people to start that first next mass stage of awakening that's physical, that will then correspond, if we're doing that in a way that we're not getting into warfare in country to country where we're obstructing the consciousness in a way that's being blocked, and then we should be able to start to see new places, new some of these Atlantean connections and older connections that have been not available, coming up either through earthquakes, earth movements, or just discoveries. All of a sudden, they'll be flying across, this summer, the equator somewhere in the middle of the jungle where some flight path is taken, 100,000 times before, the same flight path, and all of a sudden we can see this complex. Why wasn't it there before? Well, it wasn't time, and we do have to elevate ourselves enough that we can actually see certain things. Is it always available? Yes, it is, but people just don't see it. So it's going to, plus just more generic earth movement, which opens up more of this ancient knowledge. But I would watch June very closely, July very closely, first 2 weeks of August very closely.
What I wanted to ask Andrew, and we didn't have time, but I was wondering, I know there's earthquakes in Egypt, and I could just imagine some kind of cave-in or collapsing area that would reveal the Hall of Records. Wouldn't that be something? Right.
Yeah, that would be a little harder to deny, but it might. I kind of my thought is it may be in a more mundane place and somewhere in the world where it's just really, really difficult to deny once it happens. It just that people begin to photograph it and put it on the web and transcribe it themselves, whatever's actually there. But it's just a fascinating time.
I was going to say, I'm sorry. I was going to say that I had a feeling Andrew was going back to Egypt, but he didn't want to tell us when. I just had that feeling he does have plans to go back very soon. I don't know why I had that feeling, but hopefully he will put that on his website, and we'll know more about that. But, Bill, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us all about your experience inside the Great Pyramid and about those orbs. They sound incredible. I want to go now and see these orbs, these great big balls. Were they luminous? That's what were they pulsating or?
Sometimes when someone's talking about an orb, they're talking about something that's very, very translucent, just hardly discernible.
Right.
But these weren't solid. They were just shy of being solid, but they were medium brightness to kind of medium high brightness, if I can use a headlight analogy. They weren't so bright that they blinded you. They weren't, but they were. But you once you, again, this is kind of the thing with some of these things. Once you see them, then you always know what they are. You always know that's an orb. That's not a light reflection of a. It's not a camera distortion or something. That's what that is, and or something wrong with your eyes. But we're surrounded by intelligence, and it's just learning to interact with it and open it up. So this summer, there's a whole other range of the population, I think, that is going to interact with intelligence in some form that's new to them, and how that transpires, we'll see. So exciting time.
Bill, I don't know if you excuse me. I don't know if you can answer this question, but someone in the chat room is asking, and I think this would have been maybe for Andrew, but maybe you know what a monatomic gold is, or stardust that was found in Egypt. Do you know anything about that? I haven't heard of that. I'm not sure what she's asking.
I do. It speeds up the gold. Speeds up the gold is a fantastic conductor. It accelerates the processing speed of whether it's on a neuron or whether it is in with a physical substance, and with there can be a restorative effect with the body, and also humans can increase their abilities by using those molecules that are derived from gold or gold substrates, etc. So there are people doing good work with that. There are some people that aren't, that they're not having, they're not working with those true substances, but yes, I would say that Egypt at that time of the pyramid construction that was very aware of that technology and working.
Well, thank you for answering that. That's great, Bill. Well, thank you so much. I don't want to keep you much longer. I just want to thank you and remind the listeners that you'll be back on the show. That will be March 5th on a Friday at 5 p.m. Mountain Time. And you're our resident astrologer. You have your own website, also on Blog Talk, which is /Bill-Hedrick, that's Hedrick, and you have www.universalastrology.com, and you'll be telling us all about the new moon and the new month. Again, I can't believe it's almost time again for a new month, Bill. It seems like yesterday we just talked about February.
Talk about processing speed flying.